became clear that what we're being sold today as modern wheat is something entirely different than what it was 40 years ago. So there was a very noble effort, not a dishonest or evil effort, but a noble effort to increase the yield per acre to help feed the world's hungry.
And now a new nationwide wheat breeding program was underway. Used McFadden's Hope wheat as the basis for the rust-resistant, high-quality wheats we know today. And so one more threat to the nation's bread supply was brought under control. Once more, science penetrated the secrets of nature.
But in those efforts, they bred wheat over and over and over again with various strains. They bred wheat. Wheat is a grass. They bred wheat with other wild grasses to extract certain genetic characteristics. And then they started to subject wheat to other methods, such as the methods of mutagenesis, the purposeful induction of mutations using toxic chemicals, radiation, gamma rays, etc. Problem, you can't control the mutations you get. You can't order up the mutation you want, say, for better pest resistance or a reduced height. You just get this dozens, perhaps hundreds of mutations. If they're not fatal, the plant survives, but you've induced numerous mutations. So wheat is now what's no longer a 4.5 foot, 5 foot tall, 2 meter tall traditional plant. It's an 18-inch tall, short, thick, stocky, semi-dwarf strain, they call it. So that change in appearance is accompanied by multiple changes in its genetics, in its biochemistry, in the proteins in particular that are expressed. And when products made with high-yield semi-dwarf wheat were put on store shelves around 1985 to late 80s, that's when we saw an explosion in numerous problems. It coincides perfectly with a dramatic increase in calorie intake in Australia, US, Western Europe, UK. It coincides perfectly with an explosion in autoimmune diseases and in type 2 diabetes and obesity. Now that doesn't prove cause and effect, but I'm pretty well convinced it is probably a cause and effect.
The wheat we're eating is not the wheat we ate. It's not the bread of our ancestors, which has many more proteins that create inflammation that are gluten proteins. It also has a much higher starch content. In fact, 2 tablespoons of sugar raises your blood sugar less than 2 slices of whole wheat bread. So we now know that the kind of wheat we're eating is very inflammatory, that we know that this can disrupt the gut lining. So looking at celiac disease. 50 years ago, they had blood samples on 10,000 people looking at celiac disease, and they compared it to a blood sample of 10,000 people today, and there was a real increase of 400% in celiac disease. So this is not a fad. This is a real phenomena that's a result of the increased use of antibiotics, the lack of breastfeeding, the processed food, and the chronic stresses, environmental toxins, all colluding to drive disruptions in the gut function, which allows the gluten to actually break through and create the systemic inflammation.
Dr. Holland and Fasano at Harvard published a study that shows when humans eat wheat, every human that eats wheat, not just the celiacs, but every human that eats wheat gets tears in the inside lining of the gut every time they're exposed to wheat.
We now know through clinical research it is an absolute that autoimmune disease begins in the gut. Just as Hippocrates said over 2,000 years ago, all disease begins in the gut, so does autoimmune disease. So with autoimmune disease, here's really how it works is there's a barrier in between your bloodstream and your intestines. It's called your gut lining. And your gut lining has microscopic, these little holes in it. What can happen over time if somebody has intestinal inflammation, large holes open up in your gut lining.
Some cells turn over very quickly, like the inside lining of the gut. Every 3 to 7 days, you have a whole new lining to your gut. It's like the skin of a snake, just kind of sheds right off. So you had toast for breakfast, it heals. You have a sandwich for lunch, it heals. Pasta for dinner, it heals. Croutons on your salad, it heals. A cookie, but it heals day after week, after month, after year, after year, after year, until one day you don't heal anymore. Now, when you don't heal, that's pathogenic intestinal permeability. And these tears can occur and stay torn when you lose tolerance and you don't heal anymore when you're 2 years old, 22 years old, 72 years old. It just depends on when you cross that threshold as to when this happens. But it happens.
So what can happen now is undigested food particles such as gluten, casein, toxins, bad bacteria, candida can leak from the intestines into the bloodstream. Your body says those shouldn't be here. It starts this immune response, and if that isn't corrected over time, what can happen is it starts autoimmune disease, and it can affect that systemic inflammation can affect the joints, causing rheumatoid arthritis. It can affect the thyroid, causing Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It can affect the colon, causing things like Crohn's disease, or the muscles, causing fibromyalgia. So really, all autoimmune disease is first caused by leaky gut. It starts in the gut lining. You know, I really believe the biggest factors that are causing this gut reaction are, number one, it's certain foods, refined grain products. Sugar is a big one. Sugar feeds candida and yeast in your body, which causes this issue. Genetically modified organisms, they're wired with pesticides and viruses, which kill off beneficial microbes in the gut, causing leaky gut and autoimmune disease. Also looking at hydrogenated oils. Artificial sweeteners are a big one. All of these things contribute to leaky gut.
So if you have any inflammatory condition, or really any chronic condition, gluten should be at the top of your list in thinking about why. Whether it's an autoimmune disease, digestive disorders, depression, neurologic issues, many of these things are driven through gluten. And by doing an elimination diet, you can often see the impact. And we've seen athletes like Djokovic, who's actually accelerated his career by removing inflammatory foods like gluten and dairy and sugar, and seeing him go from near the bottom of the pile of professional tennis players to number one and unbeatable.
I just needed that information about the change of the diet and nutrition. And it's with that change in 2010 and the years after that, I felt so strong as a tennis player on the court, and I recovered better. I had more endurance, I had more clarity of mind. All of a sudden, all the horizons of life opened up to me. The circumstances in life that I've had after that were phenomenal.